so it's 4 o'clock on the dot. So we're going to get started so that we don't run out of time. Thank you for coming. My name is Janet Chen. I was drafted to fill in to chair this panel, which is Literature, Identities, and New Trends. So it's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, who is Wang Jianhui from the Department of Comparative Literature at the Sorbonne. You come all the way from France just for this? Wow, amazing. So I'll invite her to come up to the podium, and we will cue up her PowerPoint, and the title of her talk, as you can see, is Reading Beyond Borders. I'll keep time. You know this by now, because we're now in the 3rd session. I'll wave this at you for 5 minutes and 1 minute. But I think, and our 4th speaker, I think, will be a video presentation. Wonderful, thank you.
Okay, so thank you, Professor Chen, and good afternoon. A brief introduction. So my name is Wang Jianhui. I'm currently a PhD candidate in comparative literature department at the New Sorbonne University, also known as University of Paris III. And it is a great honor to be able to participate in this conference with so many distinguished Taiwan studies, especially Taiwan literature specialists. And I will divide my speech today into 3 parts. So first, I will summarize the development of French translation of Taiwanese literature before 2011 based on 4 published articles. And following this, I would like to present the, following this, I would like to present the French translation from 2011 to today and analyze the evaluation of the publication strategies and its impacts. Finally, I will turn to my analysis of how translation could be used as a perspective on identity studies and on the reflection of the singularities of Taiwanese literature from an outer position. Okay, so you may wonder, so you may wonder why I'm using 2011 as a reference point. As you can see in the PowerPoint, there are so far 4 papers that have analyzed the state of Taiwanese literature in France before 2011. And due to time constraints, I will only summarize the main points of these 4 articles that echo my problematics. And to begin with, there is a discrepancy in identifying the first French translation of Taiwanese literature, literary work. Angèle Pinault, Esterline, et Gwenaël Gafric all wrote about the birth of French translation by mentioning Huang Chunmin's novel, a short story, Sayonara Goodbye, Sayonara 再见, published in the magazine Paris, Beijing in 1979. However, Professor Chen Qinghao texted the Rice Sprout song, Young Girl of Zhang Ailin, published in 1958 as the starting point for French translation of Taiwanese literature. Without getting into the debate of whether Zhang Ailin is part of Taiwanese literature, without getting into the debate of whether Zhang Ailin is part of Taiwanese literature, such an argument offers a possibility of discussing the publishing location as literary geographic boundary. Does the epithet Taiwan in literature refer to author's nationality, to publishing location, or is it about the subject of work? And in general, researchers believe that the choice of French translation before 1990 was more influenced by political reason than literary. And what interests translators and researchers is thus the China in Taiwan, according to Professor Angèle Pinault. And this context explains the French translation of Chen Ruoxi's novel in Xianzang in 1980 and Chen Jiyin's Di Chun Zhuan in 1984. And Chen Qinghao's article also points out that between 1990 and 2011, the visibility of Taiwanese literature relied on several series of translation, including the collection Lettres d'extrême d'Orient, 东亚文学丛书 and Lettres Taiwanaises,台湾文学丛书 as you see on the screen. Okay. And the introduction of Taiwanese literature in the form of series not only shifts foreign readers' viewpoints in the same direction and forms, therefore, horizontal links on the one hand and a vertical view of literary history on the other. The series were echoing each other and making the works in the same series their own footnotes, illustrating, complementing, and interpreting mutually. It can be said that with the publication of the Lettres Taiwanese series from 2000 and onwards, so-called Taiwanese literature could perhaps, for the first time, no longer appear as a chapter in Chinese literature. And this statement is also proved by showing the origin of the language on the cover of the book. Grenelle Gaffric's article shows that in Liang's first two translation novel, The Butcher's Wife and Mystery Garden, we only see translated from Chinese on the cover. Then in Dark Night, published in 2004, the word Taiwan begins to appear on the cover. In addition to this, on the website of the publishing house, Shafu is classified in the foreign literature category, along with American, Israeli, and Spanish works, while Mi Yuan is classified in the Chinese literature category, along with Lao She and Wang Anyi, for instance. Beyond that, An Ye is classified in the category Taiwanese literature in Chinese language. And here are also some other examples with Zhang Dachun's novel and Wu Ming-yi, Xiaoman Puan, etc., etc. And like Marquet's novel classified as Spanish Colombian literature, Taiwanese literature is no longer fixed within the framework of Chinese literature. And last but not least, translation distinguished Taiwanese literature also by using pinyin, such as in the case of the name of Zhang Guangzhi. Since 2011, the number of literary translation, theses, and monographs had made leaps and bounds. It deserves, therefore, a further analysis for the next decade of the 21st century, and that's the motivation of my research. So in the first, Okay, and in the first place, after editing the series of 东亚文学丛书 and 台湾文学丛书, Professor Isabelle Habu,何碧玉 and Professor Angèle Pinault, 何碧弄教授, continue to build up a landscape of Taiwanese literature with these 4 volumes of selected contemporary Taiwanese short stories, which passed through Japanese colonization, the post-war period, the modernism of the 50s and 90s, the Novelist movement of the 70s to the end of the 20th century. In addition, the publishing house Circe systematically presents Taiwan poets in the form of a poetry anthology. Apart from the form of anthologies, thematic translation has also emerged in the past 5 years in order to reach out to more diverse issues and export works of different generation and writing style to the French-speaking world, such as this 3 collection of short stories, 台北街角的故事 in 2016, 台湾短篇小说选集 in 2018, and 福尔摩沙台湾民主故事集 in 2021. Okay. And Jean Dayu magazine self-proclaimed the new voice of Asian literature, translation works by writers from Singapore, Malaysia, Vietnam, Indonesia, Thailand, India, Sri Lanka, Tibet, Turkey, Uzbekistan, China, Japan, Korea, and Taiwan. And each of these 10 issues published from 2015 has included works written by Taiwanese writers. In addition, a special issues on Taiwan was published in 2016. The issues are divided by themes such as youngest and identities, dreams, violence, mythology, food, love and sensuality, history and memory, animals, exile, futures, etc. Such an editorial approach not only delineates the universality of Taiwanese literature and its ability to dialogue with world literature, but also portrays Taiwan through its originality as the birthplace of various literary works. In conclusion, if we consider translation studies from the viewpoint of reception theory, we will find that the term translation refers not only to acts and works of converting the source language into the target language, but also refers to the process of translation in which several roles involved, from author, translator, editor, readers, even to critics. In many cases, translation is not only used to exchange and disseminate knowledge, it is also the driving force behind the ideology. After 40 years of development since 1979, not only its aesthetic value, but also its historical position has been taken into account in the selection of French translation of Taiwanese literature. Therefore, in terms of identity construction, here I refer to the meaning of finding its singularities. Translators, overseas publishers, and reviewers play an important role in extending the borders. If we see all the translation publication as a unity, the relatively few French translation of Taiwanese literature form a particular landscape from the outside. In translation studies, we must be aware of not only the source language and the target language, but also the implication of author's language and translator's language. Therefore, how to analyze on the metaphysical levels of selecting or acceptance of works, multiple linguistic layers, translator intervention, and nature of translation beyond traditional textual analysis of translation studies can probably become an outside point of view for identity studies. Okay.
5 minutes.
3 minutes. Okay. So what do I want to? Okay. So that would be this one. Okay. So where am I? For example, unlike most translation works in which a single target language is used to translate the entire text, or only footnotes are marked to make the differences, Gwenai Le Gaffric chose to translate the passage in Taiyu in Wu Ming-yi's novel 睡眠的航线 into the Creole language of French Martinique. By doing so, the translation emphasized the Taiwanese-ness of post-colonial identities, such as plural lingualism and hybridity. At the same time, it brought Edouard Glisson's theory of creolization into the discourse of Taiwanese studies. And on the contrary, could we say that the translator, which is Guan Shouqi, brings Taiwan's history into a transnational or post-colonial discourse. The introduction of the creolization theory switches, therefore, the scale of viewing Taiwan from local to global. It becomes a methodology for rethinking the relationship between history and culture, language and literature, nation and the world. In other words, language plays more than just a semantic or a syntactic role in the text. The plural lingualism in Taiwanese literature is not only an irremediable flow of post-Babel translation, nor a symptom according to Barbara Gazan, but a punctum in the eyes of Hollenbach that capture readers' attention. The translation meets the original in an instant. Then, following the tangent line in Walter Benjamin's eyes, extends outward, where the translation becomes the reference of the original, allows the reader's glimpse author's identity through the interstices of the untranslatable, hidden on the backside of the original. From now, the translation is no longer just an imperfect substitute for the original work. On the contrary, the translation and the original work are mutually subject to each other. There are different facets of literary work, two texts that coexist on the same palimpsest, but cannot completely overlap in terms of genre. Again, as an intermediary between source language and target language, like Omibaba's third space, translation moving back and forth between creating acclamation and preserving otherness is not a closed and stereotyped state, but a mirror, a field, an agentivity. To sum up, translation as an other and elsewhere interacts with the original and produces plurality and differences, echoing the nature of identity. This reading experience of decentering led me as well to question the necessity and possibility of reading Taiwanese literature and exploring identity in a position beyond borders. Thank you very much.
So now we welcome Jessica from the Department of Asian Studies, University of Texas at Austin, where she is a PhD candidate working on cultural production of post-martial law Taiwan.
Thank you for the very generous introduction, Professor Chen. I'm actually not a candidate. I'm just a PhD student. And it is my... It is truly my honor and pleasure to share my work with you all today. My name is Jessica Fan, and my Chinese name is Fan Sijie. The title of my paper is Taipei as an Urban Palimpsest, the case of Taiwanese novelist Ming-yi's fictional universe. Born in Taipei in 1971, Ming-yi's formative years intersected with the critical transitional phase in modern Taiwanese history, which is marked by rapid economic growth, urban development, and democratization. Taipei is featured prominently in Wu's repertoire, which can be partly attributed to Wu's autobiographical experience as he grew up in the Zhonghua Market Bazaar, a notable landmark of Old Taipei. This paper examines the ideological and social political implications evoked by the palimpsestic representations of Taipei in Wu's literary works by delving into the interconnections between identity, urbanity, and post-coloniality. Among Wu's diverse oeuvre, I selected Roots in the Dream, The Magician on the Skywalk, and The Stolen Bicycle for discursive analysis. Despite their differences in length and structure, all three novels feature characters that flash back and forward in time, with Taipei often being a spatial node of temporality and subjectivity, or an anchor for lost dreams or repressed memories. This paper will address the following questions. First, how is Taipei palimpsested topographically, linguistically, and culturally in Wu's works? And second, How does Taipei's spatiality of displacement and emplacement in actual and fictional terms cast light on Taiwan's past, present, and future? According to the Oxford English Dictionary, a palimpsest is defined as a paper, parchment, or other writing material prepared for writing on and wiping out again, like a slate. Scholars such as Joseph Allen and Luo Shiwei have adopted the concept of palimpsest to delineate the geomorphological transformation of Taipei's landscape. Although this paper benefits greatly from these works, my focus is on the literary representations of Taipei. Compared to maps and other cartographical representations of space, literary texts seem to be particularly charged with potentialities to create pathways through which the complexities, ambiguities, and nuances of everyday experiences can be explored more fully. As Maeda I demonstrated, the city functions as an intermediary space between state power and private desire. The symbiosis between literary text and the city is perhaps best encapsulated by Maeda's statement that the novel is a text product of the city. The role of literature in subject formation has also been emphasized by Peng Chia. While differentiating between Henry Lefebvre's notions of representations of space and representational space, Chia states, "What is significant for us is that Lefebvre gives art an important role in the temporalization of space. Representational space is epitomized by art and the imagination. Representational space influences the spatial practices of individual subjects when they become aware that they do not merely inhabit social space as passive subjects, but can also actively participate in making it." In the following sections, I will demonstrate the ways in which a palimpsestic approach to Ming-yi's works can open up new interpretive possibilities, as it not only sheds light on the palimpsestic histories of Taipei, but also illuminates the dynamic social space of quotidian meaning-making practices. Throughout Wu's artistic career, Zhonghua Market has been a recurring source of inspiration. Consisting of 8 three-story buildings aligned in a row along Zhonghua Road, Zhonghua Market was built in 1961 to replace the squatter settlement strip that was an ad hoc practice to address the housing shortages in Taipei after the influx of mainland immigrants displaced by the Chinese Civil War. Once the busiest hub in Taipei that was home to tens of hundreds of shops and restaurants, Zhonghua Market was demolished in 1992 due to the construction of the underground metro system. In The Magician on the Skywalk, Wu flashes out a vivid literary world of vivid details in which Zhonghua Market is located at the center. The market consists of 8 buildings: Zhong, Xiao, Ren, Ai, Xing, Yi, He, and Ping. My home is located between Ai and Xing. There is a skywalk between Ai and Xing. All sorts of vendors can be seen on the skywalk, including those that sell ice cream, children's clothing, clay oven rolls, Waco bras, goldfish, turtles, and tortoises. Sometimes the police will come and chase away the vendors, but the skywalk is simply intersected with too many passageways, so often the vendors will just roll up their sacks and temporarily shelter in the buildings for a quick answer to nature's call. Such a lively description of Zhonghua Market tells us a lot about the way the marketplace is inhabited and experienced by ordinary people. Although the naming of the market buildings is very much ideologically loaded, Wu's fictionalized space reveals the other side of the story. As a liminal space of grassroots vivacity, the market provides a sanctuary of everydayness, where the vendors can temporarily escape from the power of the state. And in that sense, Zhonghua Market functions as a kind of heterotopia, which in Foucault's term refers to a space of otherness, or an in-between space that is simultaneously related to the present world and utopia. Heterotopias disrupt reality by suspending, neutralizing, or inverting the sets of relations they happen to designate, mirror, or reflect. As a palimpsestic heterotopia, Zhonghua Market allows the scriptural inferior or undertext of normal people's everyday life to shine through. In addition to Zhonghua Market, Zhongshan Hall is also a significant landmark of Taipei. It is where the stolen bicycle converges with Roots in the Dream in an intriguingly intertextual manner. In an almost fourth wall breaking move, the first person narrator of the stolen bicycle mentions that he wrote a novel called Roots in the Dream years ago, which was loosely based on the disappearance of the protagonist's father. Unsatisfied with the way the novel leaves the whereabouts of the father's bicycle unresolved, a reader sent the narrator a letter which reads as follows. At the end of the novel, the narrator's father, Sabulo, rides his bicycle to the Zhongshan Hall and then just disappears into thin air. He doesn't return to the market, doesn't go home. Where does he go? A bit messy, isn't it? Even if I could bring myself to leave the loose thread hanging, what about that bicycle? Sorry, why would Sabulo just ride his bike to the Zhongshan Hall and then leave it there? To me, that bicycle is the symbol. It has to be. Fine, but where does that bicycle end up? The location where the father last parked his bicycle, Zhongshan Hall, is a historical monument of political and cultural significance. Previously known as the Taihoku Public Assembly Hall, Taipei Gonghui-tang, the building was originally intended as a tribute for Emperor Hirohito. It was renamed Zhongshan Hall in 1945 by the nationalist government, and it was where Taiwanese intellectuals convened and organized the February 28th Incident Response Committee in 1947, many of whom were later arrested or persecuted. Zhongshan Hall also witnessed many important diplomatic events, including the signing of the Sino-American Mutual Defense Treaty and the reception of the US President Richard Nixon and South Korean President Shin Man-rhee. Besides a symbol of centralized power, Zhongshan Hall has also staged many artistic spectacles. Artists who performed there, including writer, vocal musician Liu Heruo, choreographers Cai Ruiyue and Lin Huaiming, and folk singer Yang Xian. The Taipei Golden Horse Film Festival and Awards and the Taipei Film Festival have both taken place at Zhongshan Hall. Indeed, Zhongshan Hall has functioned as a dynamic, affective space where privately felt collective memories could be shared among many. It is in this sense that Zhongshan Hall became a meaningful site in Wu Ming-yi's novels. While Zhongshan Hall remains a reminder of family trauma, it is also an evocative site that simultaneously registers loss and remembrance. Epitomizing palimpsestic histories of conflicts, violence, and survival, Zhongshan Hall is a generative space through which repressed voices and memories can be brought to light. While topographical palimpsests feature prominently in Wu's works, Wu pays due attention to the multicultural and multilingual landscape of Taipei, or Taiwan in general. In both Roots in the Dream and The Stolen Bicycle, Taiwanese and Japanese have been used in dialogues to convey the ways the characters speak and think. In The Stolen Bicycle, however, the presence of Taiwanese is particularly pronounced, often accompanied by romanization or definitions in parentheses. In doing so, Wu generated poetic effects by simultaneously invoking the sound and sense of the language. In the postscript of The Stolen Bicycle, Wu states, "After rendering the sense in Chinese characters, I also often supplied the sound in phonetic symbols or romanization for the reader to linger over or even like an incantation, read aloud. I've always believed that language is not just a means of communication, that it is fundamentally poetic. Languages are not mere casks for wine. The cask makes the wine." In addition to Taiwanese, expressions from Japanese and indigenous language Zhou are also scattered throughout the novel, which together paint a polyphonic landscape of Taiwan. The English translation by Daryl Stirk retains much of the linguistic diversity of the original, as exemplified by the abundance of Romanized Taiwanese expressions, including character names like Amoa and Ahun, as well as objects like Kongbingcha and Tibei. Another telling example of multilingualism in the English translation is the narrator's reminiscence about a bicycle ride with his father to a pediatric clinic. Back then, we had to go outside the city wall, an expression that has survived the wall's demolition early in the Japanese era. To see a real xiaxing, a real doctor, my father had to ride with me on his iron horse past the benevolence, filiality, and loyalty buildings. He would turn his head and tell me we're at Bunding, to the North Gate, where many years before Ma had taken a ride to try to make it to the train station in time to save my sister Amua. We rode around the roundabout through the neighborhoods the Japanese had named Eiraku and Taihei, all the way to the Taipei Bridge. Relying on a 1935 map of Taipei, I tried to restore the bicycle route taken by the protagonist and his father. The previous passage illustrates the superimposed layers of Taipei's history and geography. Moreover, it demonstrates how common it is to code switch between different languages in the Taiwanese everyday life. The ways that characters pronounce certain place names are linguistically as well as ideologically coded. The juxtaposition of spaces named by different regimes registers the palimpsestic nature of Taipei on both toponymic and cultural fronts. By delineating the fissures and disjunctures between the state-engineered narratives of the urban space and the embodied experience of the city dwellers, Wu not only sheds light on the key role Taipei plays in Taiwan's compressed trajectory of modernization, but also articulates a locally embedded form of post-colonial subjectivity through creative production and reproduction of everyday space. On the topographical level, Wu's novels portray Taipei as a liminal space where heterotopic imaginaries and alternative socialities can be explored. On the social-cultural level, Ming-yi's novels textualize the multilingualism and multiculturalism of Taiwan's social landscape. Through excavating the palimpsestic temporalities and spatialities of Taipei, Wu's works hint at the possibility of a more inclusive, hybridized form of post-colonial identity. And these are the references cited in my paper, and that's the end of my presentation. Thank you so much.
You were 1 minute, you had an extra minute, so that was brilliant. You saved a minute. All right, so I'm pleased to welcome Shu Wei from the Department of Taiwan Culture, Language, and Literature. This is
Yeah.
Wonderful. To talk about comparing cross-cultural languages in Taiwan.
It's my honor to present a paper in a meaningful conference, and I'm a visiting scholar at UC San Diego, and there are my academic book, and this year I published the new academic book is Imagining Space-Time in Taiwan Fiction, and today I focus on the travelogue. I always ask by myself, when did they take a trip? Where did they go? And today I chose two writers. One is mercial period, and another is more post-mercial period. And who are they? Why they write down their travelogue, and how did they write? So my research question is, what kind of multi-directional critical do the authors have in their travelogues? What were the writers' background, and which routes did they choose? What are the themes implied in their travelogues? And one writer is Yin Haiguang. His real name is Yin Fusen. He settled in Taiwan in 1949. And another writer is Xiangman Lanpo-an. He born in Lanyu. He left his hometown to study and work in Taiwan for many years, and returned to Lanyu in 1989. And it's different time. And Yin Haiguang, he is a philosopher, a professor, so he always use a philosophical criticism and restructuring of a survival situation, because in mercial period we have no freedom of speak and limit to publish, or you didn't go abroad, you have to apply in advance, so many limit. So and post-merger period, the Xiaomalan Poan, he restriction of self-identity and significance subjectivities. And I collect so many first-hand data. In Haiguan, when he traveled to America, he write down immediately. So he write travelogue and publish in Free China, the magazine, at that time. But after that, he rewrite it and collect so many travelogue and put in the book. Is Marrying and Judging. And another, in addition, I read so many letters. At that time, he write the letters to his wife. It's so different from the public opinion, because you publish in the magazine or newspaper in a merger period, you have so careful, and you so in Haiguan use so many metaphor. But in later, it's private, so he always criticize directly or say love to his wife. And another book is Xiaomalan Poan, A 14 Dream in the Sea. It's not just a travelogue, it's presentation, the political situation, and creative the literature after cultural context. And I cite the academic book, it's Time and Narrative. The time is not just in Haiguan, not just write down at that moment. How he faced in the future. So the narrative is time, the past, and in the future. And when I read the Xiaomalan Poan travelogue, I see I cite the book. We are the ocean, because when he travel, he think he always memory collect with the traditional custom or his memory. And so for indigenous people, the time is a curricular. It's not just exact independently of the nature surrounding and the society. And I compare with different writers. In Haiguan, always use the metaphor of longing for free space, or so many landscape, but he used the symbol of living situation. And the Xiaomalan Poan, multiple dimensions, and the sphere of the ocean. I draw the map of the route in 1955 from Taiwan to Tokyo and to American 5 states. And it got the funds from the Harvard Engine Institute, but the funds support offered from the state of America, United States. And I use the DocuGIS. It's how to say? I just put some data, and the computer will write down automobile. So it is not use my hand to write down to draw the routes. And another writer in 2003, Xiaomalan Poan, he faced the death of parents and his brother with a month. So it's a journal of hearing, like me. My mother passed away last year. This when I'm visiting here, it's a journal of hearing for me. And he got the funds from Taiwan government. And next year he participated in another program. It's he built a boat and sailing on and went to the Pacific Ocean. And it's so many islands there in South Pacific. And it's his route in 2005. And I compare with in Haiguan went to Japan, America, Xiaomalan going to the South Pacific, and they got some funds. It's important because they stay longer and it's so expensive. But for in Haiguan, it's the only time he had ever witnessed and experienced a democracy society. After that, he applied again, but the government let him go outside. so sad. And Shaman Poan, he's indigenous people, and he visited a lot of island. And I see, and a part of is a memory and transformation power of travelogue. And in Haiguan, not just describe the American society, compare with the Taiwan. And he went to the museum like Harvard University, and it's meaningful. And when he came to Japan, he is so surprised. He described 6 years. He always read the newspaper, and he said, "Oh, he's understood the Japan as a pure political existence, because on the newspaper always say the political or the war is not real society." And he's described like a person stay in the room, didn't see outside, just imagine the sunset and sunrise. And he said, if you go outside, and I connect with the porter, the cab, the story. If you stay in the cab, it didn't see the real society, real world outside. So it's different from arrangement before. So after that, he changed his vision for the departure. So I'm so surprised because he's a professor, but even him, he said the government control the media at that time. So many people didn't no opportunity to go outside to see the world. Yeah, and he criticized so many events or education system, and he used a metaphor like the snake, or we have to avoid infect by the veteran. So it's like you are sort of plague, or he linked the dictatorship to the wizard who sent to the ghost to harm the others. So we have to catch the ghost. So he used so many metaphors to criticize the education. And it's meaningful because the photo is taken by myself when I sit on the airplane. I see the Seattle, when Yin Haikuan went to Seattle, he said, wow, so different from the East Coast. It's nature. He loved the nature. So when he went to the Seattle Washington Lake, and he sit behind the lake, and he said, oh, so many people playing cards and dress colorful clothes and eat ice cream and sit on the boat. Oh, enjoy life. But he sit on the grass, but he feel lonely because unable to fix it. And he's no freedom at that time. So it's an environment of freedom. So when I come here, I went to the lake to take so many pictures. But maybe it's not Sunday, so not so many people there. And there are so many buildings around the lake. It's different from at that time, maybe, yeah. And in Haiguan, Jiaman writing, he not just follow, or he against the civilization, the society, and the powerful society. Yeah. And the book is island called Ecological Wisdom. I think we have learned from the indigenous in ecological wisdom, and so many technology hunting the fish, fighting fish. And when he traveled, he bought a map. It's an central, ocean central. It's not focused on the land. So many land is not Asia or Europe or America. It's an ocean in the central. So change the way people to see the world. And I saw another academic book, and it's roots and the roots. And when he travel, it always moving its roots, but he find his roots. Even he go outside, but he always dream his family, and in his dream, the family came to see him, and good luck to him. And in connection with the traditional custom and wonderful memory, and it's a Dao culture, and it's his roots. So it's not just at this moment and give him more power to face in the future, but the boat connect the land and the ocean. When he sit on the boat and he can go to another ocean, and when he is a child, his father took him to the forest and plant a tree by themselves, and his father told him, every year you have come here to talk with the trees and sing a song to trees and pray to tree, and you use the traditional languages. And when the tree grew up, he cut down and built to a boat. And the boat is not just a tour, it's a connection, the relationship, the traditional culture and the nature, and to go to see outside. But his family just fishing around the Lanyu, but 厦门人 go so far, and the tree it's nature, but this photo is from the 厦门 Facebook. This year April, my friend told me, some tourists sit on the pedal and it brought down. They didn't know the meaning, because it's not just a tour, it's connection, it's a memory, and it's so 厦门 was so sad because it's brought down, and it done by himself. It's not it's not by machine. So travel writing is it's not just the narrative history, and it's the future. And both of the two writers remembering the past and help them face the future. And not just for the writers, it's the readers. They can rebuild their life story when they read the travelogue. My conclusion is 厦门波安 and 殷海光, they criticate the government and pursue well-being as a global issue of human rights in their travelogue, explore the deep meaning of life between living and returning. They would like to change the perspective of reader by travelogues. In Haiguang travelogue showcase resistance strategy of thinker facing humanity of the KMT to Taiwan with criticism of metaphor. 厦门人 rebuilds his identity through the dynamic experience of traveling, which is increasingly able to highlight his active roles and pursuing global well-being. He has been a volunteer to help the nuclear. So many scientists stay in the Tonga Island. So it's meaningful. It's not just for his story. It's so many volunteers' story, and it's culture. Thank you for your attention.
On time. This is awesome. Our last presentation will be a recording from Chu Hui-fen from the Graduate Institute of
Hi, everybody. I'm Hui-fen Chu from National Zhongxin University in Taiwan. I'm so sorry that I cannot be there to participate in the conference in person. I'll use this pre-recording to do my presentation. Okay, the topic of my presentation is New Trends in Taiwan Literature. Okay, this paper tries to identify some new features and trends of recent Taiwan literature. I argue that while the quest for post-colonial subjectivity dominated Taiwan literature in the late 20th century. A cosmopolitan outlook characterizes Taiwan literature in the early 21st century, as we find writers draw heavily upon transnational cultural resources to create their works. We find in their works a desire to reach out for the outside world and a critical reflection on the idea of Taiwan literature and Taiwanese literary tradition. I discussed 3 features in recent Taiwanese literary works, particularly the works by millennial writers who began to claim critical attention after 2000. The first is the appropriation of transnational popular culture. The second one is the attempt to highlight the importance of Taiwan literature as a valuable asset. And the third one is the use of Japanese colonial legacy to redefine Taiwanese literary tradition. Generally speaking, Taiwan literature in the 1990s was preoccupied with the quest for post-colonial subjectivity. Martial law was lifted in 1987, and the whole Taiwanese society went into a heated debate on the identity of Taiwan and its history. During the 1990s, Taiwan literature was established as an independent pedagogical field in Taiwan. Before 1990s, there was Chinese department in every university, but no department of Taiwan literature. Since the 1990s, 18 departments or graduate institutes of Taiwanese literature have appeared. In addition, the National Museum of Taiwan Literature was set up in 1997. And in terms of creative works, the issues of identity and historical memory appear to be prominent themes in Taiwan literature in the 1990s. Historical fiction was a strong genre at the time, and it has remained so in the first decade of the 21st century. Several important works at the time are concerned with ethnic identities. For example, Li Yang's The Lost Garden, or Zhu Tianxin's In Remembrance of My Bodies from the Military Pound. In general, we can say that Taiwan literature in the 1990s showed a strong critical reflection on Taiwanese subjectivity. The key concepts for reading this work include resistance, oppression, exploitation, and intervention. I strongly recommend Margaret Hillenbrand's 2006 article, The National Allegory Revisited, Writing Private and Public in Contemporary Taiwan. I think this is a very useful guide to Taiwan literature in the 1990s. Okay, when we turn to the literary works that appear in the first decade of this century, we find the same interest in historical memory. However, instead of post-colonial resistance and protest against the oppression, there seems a stronger cosmopolitan outlook. I use the term cosmopolitanism to suggest an openness to external cultural resources. In an essay I co-authored with Chen Zhifan, we argue that indigenous literary works published after 2000 continue to show a great interest in roots searching, but there is interesting stylistic change. The notion of post-colonial resistance is replaced by a cosmopolitan openness to a larger world. We also find indigenous writers make use of transnational popular culture, for example, Harry Potter or Lord of the Rings, to construct their narratives. Badai's Uli is a case in point. This novel tells the story about indigenous Puyuma witches and witchcraft. Some scenes in this book, for example, a meeting between 1,000-year-old trees, strongly suggest the influence of Lord of the Rings. A similar cosmopolitan outlook can be found in the works by millennial writers. Ivan Zhang uses the term millennial writers to refer to writers who were born in the 1980s. Their works share some similar features. I'll use two collections of short stories to illustrate my point. One is Anecdotes of a Magnificent Island, The King, and the other one is 100 Years of Taiwan Literature from 1900 to 2000. This is a collection co-authored by 12 millennial writers or scholars. Okay, Anecdotes of a Magnificent Island is a collection of 5 stories told in relay by 5 young writers, Taiwanese writers or Japanese artists and writers from the colonial period appear in these stories as main characters. For example, Misuzu Nishikawa appears in the first story of this collection, and the Taiwanese writer Li Heruo, who appeared in the wake of the February 28th event, is given a prominent role in the last story of this collection. As a whole, I would say that this publishing project was inspired by Japanese literature in several ways. For example, the idea of transforming writers into fictional characters comes from a popular Japanese manga, which presents renowned Japanese writers and artists as key characters in the narrative. The idea of the relay form also comes from a publishing project launched by a Japanese magazine called Post. Another feature that shows the influence of Japanese culture is that 4 of the 5 stories in the collection are genre fiction, closely connected with Japanese popular literature. Japanese monster literature, 妖怪文学, Japanese Yuri literature, Japanese BL literature, and Japanese fantasy literature. It is clear that this collection tries to blur the boundary between literary fiction and genre fiction. This turn to popular literature shows millennial writers' response to the changing literary environment. In Taiwan, literature no longer has the power of social impact as it used to have in the previous decades, and the literary market in Taiwan dwindles dramatically. Turning to popular literature is used by the young writers as a strategy to reinvent Taiwan literature and widen its readership. Another reason I think that accounts for this interest in popular literature is that millennial writers grew up in an environment saturated with popular fan culture. blockbuster movies and games. Transnational popular culture is part of their world. In addition to the appropriation of transnational popular culture, another new feature that surfaces in this collection is that the writers make it a point to engage in dialogues with their Taiwanese predecessors. All the 5 stories in this collection refer to Taiwan literature and transform Taiwan writers into fictional characters. It is noteworthy that Japanese writers and their works also appear in these stories. In a way, millennial writers try to reclaim Taiwanese colonial memories and Japanese cultural legacy. In so doing, they redefine the concept of Taiwan literature and a distinct Taiwanese literary tradition. I would say that this building of intense intertextuality with Taiwan literature and Japanese legacy is a sort of writing as inheriting. Millennial writers suggest that to write is to inherit the legacy of their predecessors who contributed to the shaping of Taiwanese literary tradition. The contribution of Japanese writers in the colonial period is also acknowledged. Now, these features that we find in Anecdotes of a Magnificent Island also characterize the book 100 Years of Taiwan Literature from 1900 to 2000. This collection of 101 stories maps the development of Taiwan literature in the 20th century in chronological order. Each story is devoted to either a writer, a literary movement, a specific literary genre, or a literary community that played a significant role in the shaping of 20th century Taiwan literature. I think it is also important to note that this structural format was inspired by Nobel Prize winner Günter Grass' novel, My Century, a Novel. Each chapter of Grass' work is devoted to a year and is only a few pages long. The stories in that book are also told by different narrators from different perspectives. And this is the format adopted by 100 Years of Taiwan Literature. The features of 100 Years of Taiwan Literature are very similar to those that characterize Anecdotes of a Magnificent Island. First of all, we find active appropriation of transnational cultural resources by borrowing from world literature. In this case, it is a Günter Grass novel. We also find the same emphasis on the importance of Japanese legacy. And we also find the writers trying to break down the literary hierarchy that belittles popular literature. This book includes chapters devoted to popular literature. I think this is a significant point. The 12 authors of this collection also draw attention to literary production as a medium of remembering, recollecting, and recirculating the works of their Taiwanese predecessors. They are consciously engaged in the act of creating the afterlives of Taiwan literature. So in conclusion, I would say that what we get from Taiwan literature in the first decade of the 21st century is an image of cosmopolitan literary Taiwan. Instead of promoting a view of Taiwan literature as resistant literature, we against the dominant external cultural forces, young writers highlight literary creativity as a site of cultural and transnational connections. This cosmopolitanism can be seen in different phases of Taiwan literature, from the surrealist poetry club, the Mulan in colonial Taiwan, the modernist movement in the 1960s, the postmodernist writing in the 1980s, and literature in the past decade. I want to point out that this long-standing tradition of Taiwanese literary hospitality toward foreign literature may reflect the position of Taiwan literature as a small literature in the world literary space, as discussed by Pascal Casanova. Small literature always borrow from dominant literatures so as to generate literary revolutions in the domestic realm and to give the writers themselves a modern profile. This also reveals the symmetrical circulation of world literature as discussed by Franco Moretti in his books. I think it is within this context that millennial writers attempt to reinvent Taiwan literature by redefining it as a valuable literary capital is particularly significant. Young writers do not just appropriate foreign literatures, they also position themselves as heirs to a distinct Taiwan literary tradition. They try to build intertextuality between their writings and those of their Taiwanese predecessors. This new role of Taiwan literature as a means of remembrance characterizes Taiwan literature in the early 21st century and ushers the history of Taiwan literature into a new phase. Well, thank you for your attention to my presentation. I'm glad to have the opportunity to share my research findings with you.